Hi, so this weekend on the Battle for Azeroth beta, Blizzard opened up normal mode raid testing for Uldir, the first raid of Battle for Azeroth. They opened up access to 5 bosses. That was Taloc the Corrupted, Mother, Fetid Devourer, Zek'voz, Herald of N'Zoth, and Vectis. So we went with a few people from the guild and also a load of pugs just to try them out. So what I'm going to do here is go over what my observations were. I do want to point out, I'll point out a few times in the video as well, I have not researched these bosses in advance. I'm not going to, this isn't a guide. These are just things I've noticed that might want to bear in mind for when it does go live. But also remember, this is normal mode, so we didn't get the full gamut of mechanics there. I've not done this from a Ret Paladin specific point of view, so this might be of interest for any DPS in particular. I can't really comment too much from a healing or a tanking point of view, but I have tried to consider what it's like from both melee, which is easy because that's what I did, as well as ranged DPS point of view as well. So on to the first boss, Taloc the Corrupted. Now, the way we did this fight would look hugely melee unfriendly, and of course if this is the way you do it in your raid group, and it's going to be, you can see you get these swirlies around you. It's going to drop puddles. They do a lot of damage actually. I'm not necessarily doing it great here because I would not in position. So what we were doing was trying to move them out and drop them somewhere safe. Eventually the boss will do a bit of a charge. The ideal with this one would be a little bit like Grobulus in Naxxramas, where when you get these things, you just move to one side of the boss, drop them there, so you don't have to move out of melee range, and then the boss is moved around the room. That's sort of how we tried to do it, but this wasn't a full guild group. We had a lot of pugs here, some of which were very good, some of which were not really listening in any great detail. So we just had to do it like this, sort of move out to the other side of the room. So there's a lot of downtime, particularly for melee, but for anyone in actual fact. And what happens then is every now and then he does this charge called a cudgel. He first of all goes along and smashes it into the ground and leaves it there. And then eventually he'll go and pick it up like he just did there. At these times you do need to move away because it does damage within like a 30-yard radius or something. And you know, if you're near the point at which he does that, then you will definitely be killed unless you use an extremely powerful cooldown. Pretty much an immunity, I think. So it is just a case of having to move away there. So, yeah, for melee, it's not necessarily going to be great all the time, although tactics can help a little bit. But at the times at which he's running away like that, with, you know, smashing the cudgel down, you are just going to have some downtime. So not a particularly melee-friendly boss here. Now, this portion, of course, it is just pure single target. Now, in second phase, a lift activates, you start to move down. It takes quite a while for it to go all the way down. And you've got a couple of types of adds here. There are blobs that fixate on you. Now, really all you need is for someone to intercept those, and they'll blow up. And then you've got other adds which you can actually DPS down. You need a reasonable amount of room to be moving around here. This is why it's important to have kept all the puddles as far as possible in one part of the room, so you've got room to move around here. There were quite a few deaths when we took a few wipes on this to get this, and this is just normal, although it is considered to be quite highly tuned for normal, but still. So you need room so that you don't have to stand in bad. For melee, it's actually quite tricky because, you know, you need to be able to DPS these, or I say need, but if you're going to be of any use at all, to DPS these, and you just, because of limited room, sometimes you just have to try and be at max melee range so you're not stood in the puddles that are still spawning, remember, at this point, because of various effects. With the blobs, if you get a fixate on you, of course, you may have to then move away from being able to do DPS to things while you sort of angle it so someone else can get in the way of it. Getting in the way of it, of course, tanks are pretty good for that, but anyone can get in the way of it. It doesn't kill you. You may want a good defensive, though, because it can do a lot of damage, and then at the end of it, you sort of get knocked back off the lift there. In Phase 3, it's similar to Phase 1. It's got all the same mechanics as Phase 1, in addition to, you know, mechanics of the lift phase as well. So you can see I'm a bit more controlled there when I get it into a reasonable position. all I do is, when it's dropped the first puddle, I just move to the very edge of it to drop the second. Don't try and stack multiple up onto each other because they do a lot of damage, and that's not going to be very healthy. Again, a lot of moving away when he throws the cudgel. There may also be times when you want to get in the way yourself of a blob. There's going to be puddle spawning here. Again, this is not a tidy attempt at all. When you get the fix out on yourself, I mean, I just found it as melee easy just to move to myself to the other side of the boss, so someone else would be able to get in the way of that and explode that. The tank that's not actually actively tanking the boss is generally best place to be doing that. The downside there, of course, is, you know, sometimes you get a situation where you had to move out because of the mechanic and you've got your DPS cooldowns going. It might be an idea just to keep an eye on timers. Just wait till they've gone out before you hit your DPS cooldowns, because I did this a few times and it costs you a lot of DPS. There's nothing worse than having your DPS cooldowns going. Then it's, oh, by the way, I need you to move to the other side of the room where there is nothing to hit. Although, again, if we were doing this in a more organised way, where we'd just be dropping it on one side of the boss and then moving the boss around the room, which is likely to be the case for guild groups, coordinated guild groups, then that actually won't be such an issue. Remember, what I'm talking about here is my experiences of the way we were doing it, which is, you know, with some pugs that, as I say, were not really listening to what we were trying to do. So there will be a difference in the way you'd have to sort of approach this fight, I think, in a pug as compared to a more organised group, which could include actually some pugs who do insist on people actually listening and focusing on a particular strategy. But my overall impression of the boss is it's going to be one of those where, thankfully, because it's the first boss on any mode, it should be relatively straightforward, because it's not a great one for melee. Melee don't bring any advantages on this fight, and, you know, there are some disadvantages as well because of, you know, they're having to move away. Even, you know, you are going to have to move away when he does cudgel anyway. Obviously, a lot of range don't like DPS on the move. It's not that straightforward. But once they have moved out of the way, they can DPS. I mean, I've got to run back in there. So, not particularly melee friendly, but it is the first boss, and as the first boss, it should be easy to do with any particular composition you'll manage on any particular mode. So it won't be as big a deal as if it was a tough boss that had melee hating mechanics. So Mother, the second boss, relatively straightforward. It requires some management though, but, you know, and I didn't really research these, so all you need to do is dodge those. We had someone die on that one, which is just embarrassing. You just need to move away from those. There's no even reason to move away from the boss if you're melee on this one. I wouldn't say that this is a fight where it really cares whether you're melee or range. There's no particular... In fact, for melee, you could argue more of an advantage as far as I can tell because of the winds. I didn't work out the winds for quite a while. The best thing to do in this situation seemed to be to stand on the tanks and just push in. However, you can't stay in front of the boss at all times. It occasionally does a scalpel type ability, which is a cleave. So you don't want to be stood in front of it when it does that, but it seems to cast it. So you should get some warning of when it's going to do that. Now you can see a shield to the left of us there. What you want to do at various points of the fight is manage getting people through it. We want to sort of... We're moving through a series of shields. We're moving from one room to the other. But as people go through, it's going to do damage to the raid. There's going to be ad spawn on the other side. We don't want like too many ad spawning. It might, so you can see there the damage happening. It's a little bit like, I suppose, Sisters of the Moon when you pass across the boundary, especially on Mythic mode. Now, the ads on the other side do need interrupting. So you sort of set, you want to send some people over who can do quick interrupts, so melee probably first. And it swings and roundabouts if you're a bit of a DPS whore, because on the one hand, you can get multiple ads over there, which is like AoE, oh great. But at the same time, then they die fairly quickly, and then you stood around doing nothing. You can't just come back. You're over there. The idea is we want to get the raid across to that other side of the room as well. So, you know, I've gone through with a few other people, because again, get the people that can interrupt most easily across first. They can also be stunned, the ads. So anything that just stops them casting is fine. Now you notice here 2 targets. There's a few situations I've noticed in these bosses where there will be 2 targets up. So the potential for 2 target cleave is significant, but I'm going to talk more about that later when it's of more consequence, because, you know, a lot of the times there'll be more than 2 adds here. It's just the 2 adds at the moment. So if you're a 2 target specialist, then this is going to be better for you than someone who, as Blizzard put it, the vast majority of specs shouldn't really be AoEing until there's at least 3 targets. So now we've moved the boss through, so basically we're trying to get everyone through now. Shitload of damage going there. It wasn't managed necessarily particularly well. But, you know, we're just doing this for the first time. I think like 1 or 2 people had read up on what to do. Not many. I certainly hadn't. Now we've got more people over, of course. We've got all the mechanics, but we've also got multiple adds. Can cleave onto the boss as well. So your healers might have fun times depending on how well you manage to coordinate it all. Because you can see what's happening there is the other room is just filled up with fire. It's like we're trying to sort of move through these areas into safer areas. But yeah, like I say, when it's on winds, and like any fight where you've got these winds going off, ranged are not going to have a very happy time of it at all. And melee, as long as you can stay within range of the boss, then it's not as big deal for melee. So that's why I say. And also melee, of course, shorter interrupts, which is what you want for these adds. Shorter interrupts and stuns, in fact. So it's going to be a good fight for melee. But again, it's an early boss, so composition doesn't necessarily matter as much. When it comes to like thinking about, oh, is it melee friendly, range friendly, or anything like that, it's of more consequence on the very tough bosses, where the further away from the ideal comp you get, the much more difficult you make it. When it's on an easier boss, it doesn't really matter. But these are the periods of downtime I'm talking about, where you've got, you know, adds that die very quickly, and then you haven't got anything else to do really. Some, you know, guilds, I'm sure, once they want to start cheesing it, will just, much like stacking the dogs in Antorus, will on this one just run the way through, get loads of adds, just be AoEing the crap out of them when they can survive that. Now you can see here at this point there's very few people alive. The boss still has a fair amount of health left. But such is the relatively straightforward nature of the boss that it wasn't actually a big problem. Again, bear in mind, nothing has been tuned yet. The fights haven't been tuned. The classes certainly haven't been tuned. Classes have not even been completed yet, so there's no point in even looking at how classes are doing relative to each other. So you can see there, we managed to kill the boss with only a few people left alive for like the last quarter of it. Didn't actually drop any loot on this one, but there's a few bugs with some of the bosses. A bit annoying. And that was the second boss. Now the third boss, I suppose third boss, some of them you've got a bit of a choice about which one you go for. It's very, very straightforward. From a melee point of view, again, it's not going to be a great one for melee. The reason is not because it's harsh for melee. It's actually, there's nothing to do for melee. You're just hitting the boss every now and then. It turns around, you just get out of the way. But you've got important adds that have to be DPS before they get to the boss around. And range just needs to switch those. It's not realistic for melee to do it. Too much movement and you're not likely to get there. So you'll just need ranged sniping those. So melee are just going to be doing the DPS on the boss. And when he does his regurgitation, you just move around the side so you don't get hit by that. There's not a lot else to it for a melee. Whereas for range, you do need to keep an eye out on adds around when they're going to spawn in. You need to be turning to those immediately and DPSing those down. This was the most straightforward boss we came across of the 5 that were testable at the time. This is going to be your easy boss, so although I say, you know, there's a few different orders you can choose for bosses, why on earth wouldn't you choose this one to be third? Because this is looking like by far the easiest boss of the lot of them. You occasionally get a debuff. I'm a little bit concerned about this again. I haven't read anything on it, and I was wondering, oh, do I have to move away? Then I was just told, no, healers just need to pay careful attention to you. So again, I don't even have to move away with a particular thing as a melee. You know, you are just on the boss at all times. Move around when he does that. And that's about it. You know, you can get nasty debuffs on you. You might need to have defensives ready for those. Other than that, it's just melee the boss. But for range, yeah, watch out for the adds. But even for range, it's not difficult. I mean, this is going to happen every now and then. It's going to spawn an ad. And this is something I talks a little bit about our mother, but it's much more important here now. So here we have a situation of 2 target cleave. because we've got an ad that spawned near the boss. And we're not going to get more than one ad near the boss like this. So those 2 target specialists are going to have a good time here. But there's a few bosses where this can also happen. Remember, it's a design philosophy as Blizzard's that there only be 3 specs that are good at 2 target cleave. That's Frost Mages, Arms Warriors, and Destruction Warlocks. So that is an actual design philosophy. So here we've got another ad, a different type of ad. 2 target cleave. Again, here. Everyone else is supposed to get AoE benefit at like 3+ targets. And now we've got 3 very briefly here. So at this point, you know, we might be in better shape. But then that ad's died really quickly, of course. So we're back to 2. And this is it's a bit of a concern for me just in general terms, in terms of classes. Because we think about some of those classes, you know, Destruction Warlocks. Well, Warlocks are always very useful. Frost Mages, Mages are always very useful. And Arms Warriors, well, Arms Warriors, I mean, not only are very useful, but they still get their very useful utility beyond just this. Because they've got a class buff that buffs attack power. So that's useful for strength and agility users. They've also got the usual rallying cry still. So it gives a bit of a focus on having those classes because they're going to do really well in those situations. And it's just piling good stuff on top of ones who already have good stuff. But, you know, minor gripe from me. You know, what more did you expect from a Ret Paladin? But again, as an easy fight, are you really going to be focusing on composition to that degree? Again, I don't think so. I'm only doing this on normal. I've not looked up these bosses on any mode, so I don't know if particular mythic mechanics are either going to make it so that it's more or less important about composition. But just based on this, composition isn't going to matter at all because it's so easy. Bit of a sort of Berserkian rage there. He's just randomly chomping on things. Oh, that's chomped on me. That's me dead. But never mind, the boss died anyway. Although it did bug, the boss encounter never ended. So when you look at the logs on this one, I'm going to post the logs. It did show the fight as lasting like 8 minutes or something. That didn't last 8 minutes. And it also showed that the encounter just didn't end at all. So on to the 4th boss. And this is not an enjoyable boss for me at all. So you get these Omega Vectors on you. And what happens is when that counts down, it puts a debuff, or effectively a debuff, on the nearest allied player. Which means you're going to take extra nature damage. Now, that stacks up as well. So you can end up with certain people getting a load of these. What you'll probably have to do to manage it is if one particular person's just always seems to be the nearest one to them and they're getting loads of stacks, just try and change positions around. You can see there's a bit of room around melee here to move as well, so that you're not getting further stacks. So you get ads that spawn in. These ads have to be killed ASAP. You really do need to kill these immediately. So they're sort of pulled into the boss quickly. So again, melee can cleave. Again, you will notice here 2 target cleave. So the gestate there means you sort of move into a suitable position because you're going to spawn an ad. We want the ad in melee. But again, your 2 target specialists are going to have a good time here. I don't know whether this is just this raid where this is happening or whether this is going to be something that's going to be happening throughout the expansion. But you just notice lots of situations where you think to yourself, do you know what? If I had 2 target cleave, this would be really good. Now, the liquefy means you sort of move away. I mean, I'm running massively out of the way there. I'm exaggerating a bit. It always seems to line up with a boss, with an ad as well that also needs destroying. There's a few things that happen here. You get these pools, which you need someone to soak, but they're going to get a stack when they do that. There's these things moving out here you need to move out of the way of. The problem is the closer you are to the puddle that's spawning these, like fissures or whatever you want to call them, the harder it is to dodge them because they're not tapering out quickly enough. You don't see where they're going either. Whereas if you're further out, it's very, very easy. So ideally what you want is you either want to just sod the ad and leave it to ranged, or you want to move that ad well away from it so you can be DPSing the ad at the same time as being able to see where they're coming from. And that's basically the boss. It's just cycling between those phases. When the ads spawn, you just must kill them ASAP. So anyone that doesn't have that 2 target cleave, you just got to single target them. That's all there is to it. But they have to be killed very, very quickly. I mean, this one's taking a little while here, we're just going to end up with trouble on the more difficult modes. But nothing really to the boss. At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily say it was the easiest one. Just it has very few mechanics on normal, that's all. But those mechanics are very, very important. It is super important that people do a switch properly. And you can sort of imagine, you know, that in a pug situation, if some people are thinking, well, no, it's much better for me to just stick on the boss. And that's going to cause you trouble. You are going to have sort of wipes on this boss, I think. Again, tunings, I don't know how badly it's going to be tuned. But the whole fight is either two target cleave or single target. So being a specialist, at least one of those is going to give you a better time on this boss. And this is a boss where maybe you start to think in terms, if you're going to be progressing on it and you're struggling a little bit, maybe you're thinking in terms of, well, I mean, again, it's one, there's no advantage in having melee here. Melee don't give you anything. But also melee have troubles with some mechanics. It's not great. As a result, there's an emphasis on the tanks when you're doing this in an organised group to tank the ad in such a position that the melee can DPS it and avoid these like fissures. But at the same time, if that doesn't happen, melee are going to have a hard time. So what sort of group are you in? Are you going to be in the group where the tanks can actually manage the situation, or are you going to be in a group where they can't, in which case the melee are just going to be seen as liabilities on the fight? And even if the tanks can manage that, you're still better off just having mostly ranged. It's particularly annoying. And when I say ranged, what I mean is destruction warlocks and frost mages, quite frankly. Although I think a lot of ours went arcane mage on this particular night because, yeah, tuning hasn't happened. Arcane mages are absolutely wrecking everything at the moment. But, you know, balancing hasn't taken place. So what you can see at the moment is I've got 8 stacks of the debuff. That means I'm taking a lot of extra nature damage. And so I'm being extra careful when other people are getting the Omega Vector on them. With people getting add-ons. There are some, you know, DBM is available here. So, you know, if you see someone sort of saying that they've got that particular ability, you definitely don't want to be the nearest person to them. You don't want to be accidentally getting on that. We did start off by just trying to deliberately stack it onto the tanks, but that turned out to be very far from a good idea because, you know, they're taking other debuffs as well. And it's much better off just being shared around the raid. But you just don't want someone getting loads and loads of stacks. You do need to manage it. And if someone starts to get a few, they want to be a bit careful that they're being moved away. So someone with Omega Vector, they're running towards me. So I have to be aware of that and run away from them. Just to make sure that I don't end up with that extra stack there. And then you get to a certain point close to the end, as we can see here, where we might even just ignore the ads. Because at this point, you know, when it's very, very close to a kill, we're not going to get any major problems there. So the Gestate's going out. So we're going to spawn a new ad, but we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to kill the boss. Although the ad did stay alive after the boss died. So that's neat. But I don't know whether that's a bug. You'll notice here, bug, no pun intended with this last boss here. I've still got my stacks from the previous boss. That didn't actually wipe. Even Dyne didn't wipe them. We had to actually leave the instance to come back in, but we couldn't be asked for this last one. Now, this last one is actually the most interesting of them all. It's the Herald of N'Zoth, as its official title, Zek'voz. And it has the most interesting mechanics. It has a few mechanics. And it has the most capacity for a single person to wipe you, which was a bit of a feature of certain bosses, particularly Tomb of Sargeras in Legion. This one has it in the Cloud. So first of all, there's like a dodge attack. It's going to do concentric rings, one of which will be safe. So at the moment, the inner one is safe, so it would all need to be stacked on the boss here. We don't be in front of the boss there because the boss does a cleave. So now it's sort of like the middle ring that is safe. So this is where we need to be. But very, very, very careful not to be in front of the boss there. And then the outer one. Now, ideally, the tanks, I think, when we were doing this properly, would have pulled it out a little bit further there so we can make sure that we're definitely in melee range and don't be in front of the boss for the cleave. Although in the end, it was okay. It was okay. But yes, it does do a very nasty cleave. You must not be in front of that. Now you get a series of ads here, AoE. So make sure if you're good at AoE, burst AoE particular, that you get right in there to AoE these down ASAP. They sort of go on to players, so you just want everyone stacked up at this point so they'll all go to the same point. And then again, we've got some 2-target cleave for those specialists here. So we've got something for everyone here. and then it's immediately been turned into 4-target cleave. So, sorry, Arms Warriors. Yeah, fun time's over. But for AoE specialists, there's certain points of this fight where it can be quite nice for you. But you want to be preparing for it. Luckily, it's all on timers, so you've got no problem at all. Now, you get these abilities. Someone's just leapt away there, someone's running away. That's because they've got a debuff on them. When it expires, it's going to drop a cloud. Now, that cloud needs to be well away from the rest of the raid. If anyone stands in that cloud, it's going to spawn an ad. And they're basically a wipe mechanic. It's a bit like the first boss in Tomb of Sargeras, where if you don't soak the things properly, you get an infernal spawned, and that's probably going to wipe you. So the outer one here first. Remember, it seems to be random as to which one's going to be the one to go to in the rings. But it doesn't go like outer, inner, then middle. You're always going one way. You're either going to the outer first and then in, or you're starting on the inner one and going out. But it seems to be random as to which way it is. But yes, with the clouds, if you spawn one of those ads, you're not going to. It's got so much health, you are basically just going to wipe. And if multiple people stand in the clouds, you end up with multiple ads. And it's the sort of thing you should not get any of those ads. So you spawn those clouds away. If you're running out as well, don't run into another cloud to spawn your cloud. You mustn't have anyone touch those clouds. It was even late on in the fight when someone was doing it, it was wiping us. So that's why we had to be. This was our last pull. Well, of course, it was last pull, we killed the boss. But, it was going to be our last pull anyway. So we just had to make sure everyone knew, do not stand in the clouds. And when you spawn in a cloud, don't do what someone did who nearly got kicked, which is to spawn it right under the boss. That was a bit of a mistake. Something of a faux pas. So, okay, so I've got one now. So I'm going to move it as far away as I can. You notice I'm taking damage when I'm getting this as well. So I've bubbled that just to be certain. And then drop the cloud, get back. And you can see in a situation like that, of course, I moved out well ahead of time. There is the scope for some, particularly ones with very good movement, like a warrior with heroic leap, for example, to wait till the last second and move out. You do have to make sure that you do get there in time, though. Now, towards the end, the clouds will actually start to move a little bit, so it's why it's very, very important. It does really. They get moved well away from the raid. And you get mind control effects here as well, which we're just on the boss here. But if someone gets moved in, that's fine. We can cleave onto them if you've got 2-target cleave. Again, the rings are still going to happen. In this case, it's inner first, then middle. Just being very, very careful that we don't get cleaved by the boss. We must not stand in front of the boss. You can imagine some people here, if the boss isn't being moved as quickly as they would like, to maintain their DPS and the boss ending up in front of it and dying. That's not going to do their DPS any good at all. But at this point, it does seem to be quite hectic. You notice we saved time warp for the end there. Heroism right at the end is likely to be needed because it does get a bit chaotic right at the end. Whereas the other mechanics in the fight, although they're much more interesting than the other bosses, were easily solvable. You can see, someone there has gone into the cloud, has spawned that ad, but the boss is very nearly dead. So we're just focusing everything on the boss, crowd control the ads as much as possible, and just try and kill the boss really quickly. It nearly all went very, very badly wrong. At this point, I was panicking, but it died. There we go. So those are the first 5 bosses on normal mode as they exist at the moment on the Battle for Azeroth beta. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with other people for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.